Wherefore art thou, Romeo? Seriously, where?
Presented by Still a Frog.
His name was Wilder. Not really his name, but pseudonyms seem appropriate for a story like this. You'll see what I mean. I met Wilder online. Wilder believed in lengthy courtships. And in our online iteration, courtship referred to pithy dating site messages and ponderous late-night emails. He wooed me. Is that a word that still gets used? Wooed? Regardless, it fits this story. He wooed me with the sophisticated language and the poetry of his reflections. He spoke like a cross between a history professor and a debonair soldier coming home from the war with a tale to tell and the quietly hidden scars to show for it. See, he even had me waxing somewhat poetic. When I was a boy, my mother would tell me that girls are like sunsets. Even though you know another one will be there the next day, it still breaks your heart to see it go. If indeed you are my sunset, fleeting and painfully beautiful, then I will paint you so as to keep you with me forever. It was midnight-inspired sentiments like that one that clinched it for me. Okay, in retrospect, on a corniness scale of 1 to 10, I give it an 11.5. But when you're emailing back and forth with a person who you think might be the one, even corny is an important part of belonging to each other. We finally met after about 5 months of some seriously daily corresponding, and real-life Wilder most certainly delivered. You know how oftentimes it can happen that when you meet the man of your digital dreams, he turns out to be, well, more Barney Fife than Brad Pitt? That, most happily, was not the case with Wilder. He looked better than his pics. He seemed an all-consuming presence, but in a hulking good way. Like, I wouldn't have to worry about a thing with this man by my side. Good looks and intellect and charm. I felt like throwing my hat in the air in the midst of a busy city street while singing, "We're gonna make it after all." For those too young to get the reference, Google it. Our first date consisted of dinner, then dancing, at a place that was not in any way, shape, or form set up for dancing. It was an Italian bistro. The descriptive dive comes to mind, but the soft music, even in its slight off-keyness as warbled by an accordion-playing Sicilian who ironically looked a lot like Ed Asner, just saying, drew us to the non-existent dance floor. We made that place our own. After that, I knew I was in love. Okay, I know one date and a few months of the 21st century letter-writing equivalent does not a love affair make. Don't worry, I hadn't picked out our kids' names or anything. Not really. Perhaps I toyed with some variations of... Never mind. The point is, I was determined to keep my wits about me, as my grandmother might say, and let this relationship, dare I speak that word, progress naturally. The gushing emails fortunately kept on coming. We saw each other at least 2 to 3 times a week, but every night, every single night, he wrote me something more wonderful, more intense, more eloquently soul-bearing than the night before. Sometimes I was so swept away, I found it actually difficult to breathe. And then... You always know, dear listener, that when there's an "and then," the story is about to take an unexpected, and by unexpected, I mean terribly unfortunate, turn. Horror films, just by way of example, represent the classic "and then" moments. The campers were singing by the fire, having a good old time, and then a grizzly guy with a mask massacres everyone using a chainsaw. Or Drew Barrymore is semi-flirting with who she believes is a prank caller, and then... she gets strangled, hanged, and gutted. My "and then," fortunately, is a bit less slasher film and a bit more thoughtful riddle, one that could potentially drive you crazy, if you let it. Another night, another impassioned email from Wilder. I basked in the glow of how his feelings jumped so intensely off the page, or screen, as the case may be. And then, yep, there it is, I read the following sentence. I see you in more ways than you think. That's because love does not look with the eyes. Love looks with the mind. Beautifully heartwarming and swoon-worthy, right? And for all intents and purposes, it would seem that Wilder was perhaps even proclaiming his love for me. A letter like that is one you save. It's one that goes in the scrapbook to eventually be referenced at your future wedding. That's, however, beside the point. What I was fixated on was something else altogether. Here's the thing. I'm an English teacher. I know my great books, especially my Shakespeare, and this was Shakespeare. This lyrical sentiment about love seeing with the mind and not the eyes was Midsummer Night's Dream, Helena's line to be exact. It gets paraphrased in Wilder's rendering of it, but still. Now, honestly, don't you think he should have credited Shakespeare? Said something like, as Shakespeare observed, or, in the words of the great bard, anything to acknowledge that this was not, in fact, his own original reflection, especially upon proclaiming your love for the first time. Shouldn't that be in every way pure? An oversight, right? Certainly, the next time we saw one another, he'd cop to his cribbed email and we'd have a good laugh over my English teachery paranoia. But alas, that was not to be. It was a perfectly lovely evening, downright romantic. He looked and smelled amazing. The food was divine, the ambiance unparalleled. What more could a girl ask for? How about the admission that his signature email was partly a Shakespearean hack? Listener, I know you probably think me a tad bit unreasonable, and admittedly, I have my flaws and foibles, bordering on compulsions on occasion. But in this instance, you have to understand, everything that Wilder had written to me was now called into question, the pages and pages of heartfelt poetry that he'd presented as his own. That evening, I was rather quiet during dinner. We then returned to his place. It was our first time. I listened with a somewhat skeptical ear to the tendernesses he whispered. The sex was fine. Okay, the sex was fantastic. What can I say? He read me like a book. But had he gotten me into bed under false pretense? Stop it, I silently scolded myself. Appreciate what is right in front of you. This wonderful man, a man who wants to be with you. My God, what so many women wouldn't give to switch places right now. But I decided to test him anyway. I hide myself within my flower, I began, that wearing on your breast, you, unsuspecting, wear me too, and angels know the rest. That's Emily Dickinson, I said offhandedly as we lay in bed. It's beautiful, he replied. Of course the English teacher can summon up the perfect poem from memory. He ran his finger along the line of my chin. You know, I continued, come on, listener, you can see exactly what I was doing. You came into my life and it's hard to explain, but you pierced my soul, and I am half agony and half hope. Eloquent beyond words, he gushed. Unfortunately, I can't take the credit. That's from Jane Austen, Persuasion. The literary knowledge you have on recall just astounds me. My walking library, he murmured. While I may not be quite on your level, in college my frat brothers sometimes did call me Shakespeare. No shit, Sherlock, I refrained from saying. Here, how about this? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. That, he said proudly, is from sonnet number 18. Beautiful, I observed. But I have to say, it's your original words that won me over. I kissed his cheek for effect. Your emails are pure poetry. I can't take all the credit, he smirked. Yes, keep going, I wanted to cry out. You have been my muse. What do you say I make us a midnight snack? I do an absolutely out-of-this-world PB&J, he laughed. Sure, why not? After that, I had trouble reading his nightly emails without questioning every single word. Did Hemingway write that? Maybe in A Farewell to Arms? I think Wordsworth wrote something very similar. I turned my teacher's eye to his writing as much as I did my students' papers. It got to the point where I could recite his emails by heart, and not in that feel-good, tingly, new love kind of way, more like, I will expose you for the pretender you are way. Listener, I have to admit, I became obsessed. And yet at the same time, I also felt myself reluctantly falling for the guy. How can I reconcile these two things? I suppose loneliness will let you overlook some pretty egregious sins, even stealing from Shakespeare. If only he would... I wanted to believe in him. I really did, more than you can imagine. If only... We decided to spend a lazy afternoon together, just relaxing on the back deck, doing whatever we felt like. Lazy turned into me frantically grading exams that needed to be handed back on Monday. Wilder, meanwhile, read. I silently watched him lick the tip of his finger with every page turn. I pretended not to notice as he dog-eared a page. But the last straw, the one that broke the camel's back, me being the camel here, was when he snapped a picture of one. "What are you doing?" I casually asked. "Sometimes I just like to try and remember lines that strike me as moving," he replied. "Oh, okay." I could feel the blood boiling. I could hear that infamous line of his playing over and over in my head. Louder, louder, louder. He then just went back to reading and smiling as if nothing. He simply sat there. The pounding of his lie beat out its pattern in my brain. He was making a mockery of my suspicion. "No more!" I suddenly burst out. "This has to stop. Dissemble no more. I hear the beating of your plagiarist heart." "Hey, isn't that like from an Edgar Allan Poe story?" he smiled. "Ah!" I yelled, completely exasperated. And then